So it's interesting, you know, just getting ready to start the morning. And of course, the usual, right? Interrupted by great LinkedIn messages. This one in particular is probably worth bringing up. Ash Maurya is a someone that I very much have learned a lot from. And so Ash Maurya is someone that I have very much learned a lot from. I think he is one of the unrecognized. I mean, obviously he does a good job, and many people know of him. But the reality is I feel like he deserves even more credit, more focus. Like I think people, yeah, I really enjoy. I've just benefited immensely from everything that he's learned in the journey, and then how much he passes on to other people. So, but I think this is brilliant, right? So he says, first-time founders obsess about their company/product name, domain name, logo. Good names and domains are very hard to come by, and premature optimization. Second-time founders first obsess about building something worth naming. Then they buy whatever name they want. Starting risks are greater than scaling risks. And I think this is really actually challenging for people to understand. I think first-time entrepreneurs, precisely, like what he's saying, right? Why I find this funny is because, of course, this is what I did for my very first venture many, many years ago. We spent, if you really think about it, we spent so much more time on the logo and company name. And, when I think back about the amount of time that we spent on that, it was way out of proportion for what we were actually working on. And, or I shouldn't say that, the stage. I shouldn't say what we were working on, because we were working on language learning. And there's definitely ventures that have been very successful with that. And so the market is obviously a good market. I don't think our approach at the time was the greatest, or there was challenges to it. In retrospect, it's something that I actually would like to go back and work on, because I still think there's a lot there to do. What was I saying? Oh, we totally did exactly what he was saying, right? Now, the funny part is, of course, this is still the domain that I have today, Brutal. For anybody wondering, like, what is with this name? Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So we spent all this time talking about this name, and on top of it, it's really it's a complex name. It's not like, could have named it so much better. But, it's near and dear to my heart. I've kept the email, I've kept the domain all this time. Has a lot of history, a lot of, personal, what do you want to call that? Attachment. And so, I will certainly agree with Ash in this, right? One of the key areas that we develop in as entrepreneurs, as we move forward, as we sort of better understand the risks, better understand opportunities and how to go after them, while staying within a box of a larger vision that we have. I certainly now, for example, what I'm working on right now, working on a pitch deck for it. And, right, we had the name. We had, this entire thing, right? The healer's kit. We had the idea before the name. Like, we literally, this is, an image that was produced off of a couple of iterations, relatively minimal, it's not really a logo even, right? But it's what was produced off of Midjourney, with Midjourney's amazing help. The healer's kit, the name, was, just sort of something that came up in conversation. I'd say, relatively speaking, sort of the hard part, I would say nowadays, what he's saying is there is a sort of assumption. Like, if if a company has a weird domain name, the reality is that they're going to it's one more barrier in building trust with clients. I don't want to call it a showstopper, but it's one more barrier. And but relatively speaking, think about, we 100% did what he's suggesting with Prudel. And, we spent a long time, the precise brand, like that was one of the first things. And I think there it's actually this so I will use the terminology of interesting. Okay, I don't have Figma open. I'll use the terminology of that we use in Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, which you have a vessel and the light, and which is to say that if you think about it, this is actually a good example right here. So generally the way we think about things in Jewish mysticism is you have this vessel, just like this, right? This is, what do they call this? A section. Right? It's like a little box in Figma, if you think about it, right? You can put objects in this box, and then the way they have it is, right, you move around this box and all this other stuff, and it's like these objects, they stay pinned to this box. This is what we would call a vessel, right? And this is what we would call a vessel in Jewish mystical language. And within the vessel, you can have what we call the light, or there's many different layers of this, meaning you can have a vessel, and then there's light within the vessel, and then within the light, there's the vessel, right? The outer container, and then there's within that. So there's it's a Russian doll, if you will. And it keeps going down and down and down to, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. So why do I bring this up in this context? Because I think a lot of times this sort of the presentation of a company or the branding, it's external, right? It's the vessel, and that's distinct from it's interesting. I actually wanted this one. There we go. That is distinct from what is in here, right? The light, right? Or the contents, right? Right, the inner, if you will, right? Or internal, sort of, what we call in Yiddish terms, like the kishkas of the thing, right? I don't speak Yiddish, not come from a different background, but started mind map. But it's a fun word. So there's like these, right? Everything inside, and essentially what Ash is talking about, when Ash is saying, drag this, like this, right? When Ash is saying that first-time founders obsess about these things, this is really what I'm thinking about. First-time founders, we obsess about the external presentation of a brand. For the most part, that's because that's realistically the only thing we've ever really known of brands. Like the first time you're doing it, you don't really know the internals of a company. You're learning it along the way. And so it's really hard to understand, what is the internals? What does that look like? And so, we sort of focus on this external aspect of it a lot. I would say this is the exact same challenge with, what do you have all these guys like these, these e-commerce, millionaires, and this stereotypical, yeah, exactly, right? This is here you go. This is it right here, right? This says it all. So, and this is literally, wow. like how easy it is to find this stuff. Okay, so this really is exactly, this says it all right here, right? You sort of, you get these when you're up, for many people first starting out, right? This is what you sort of get, right? You see these images of, and maybe it's inspirational for you. Maybe you see these and you say, "Hey, I can do the same thing." Right? If these guys can do it, I can do it too. And I'm not trying to say that it's somehow negative, or I don't want to typecast it as like a generalist thing of like, oh, this is horrible. That's not really so much my point. If these guys are successful and they want to spend their money on cars, okay, fine. That's may not be personally what I spend my money on, but I'm not trying to pick apart like all of their buying decisions or their lifestyle choice. Like, that's up to them. What I am more focused on is this external aspect of it, right? When you're first approaching a company, right, you're a first-time founder, and here you are, and for the most part, the reality is what you see is much more these e-com millionaire people. I think a lot of people, not everybody, right? This isn't like everybody, without a doubt. Some people are not in this place. But you see these, e-com millionaires, and that becomes the standard, or what you sort of see, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what it needs to look like, right? And so you go into this thing called building a company, and you don't necessarily realize that, or you sort of see these images, right? And these become like so much of your focus, right? Well, it's ugly. Meaning external, right? All of these is purely external. Like there's no piece of information on here. I know maybe in the article there is, I'm not saying, but I'm just saying realistically, when you see a lot of this material, so much of it is an externalization, or you're seeing the external, the results of choices of particular entrepreneurs. And those choices were enabled through, say, maybe building a 7-figure brand, right? Okay, fine. That's amazing. Like, going through that journey is absolutely amazing. And they're trying to present status. And so it's like, I think that's one of those things, that first-time founders, and I'm speaking very much from experience here, right? Is that like, this is the thing that these guys are trying to convey, right? They're trying to give this sense of like status. And the challenge with this is, I forget to change the color of this. The challenge with this is really the first time founder. They see the status, and sometimes it's hard for them to differentiate between status and wealth, let's call it. I'm trying to think, what does Naval Ravikant call it? It's famous, How to Get Wealthy. Status, here you go. Okay, so this is a regurgitation of this may be it. I'm not sure. Okay, well, at least this is the author. So let's see where he mentions this. All right, here you go. So they're actually playing the other game. He's basically saying there's two games. Yeah, here you go. So one is the money game, because money is not going to solve all your problems, but it's going to. Two of the games. I don't know if he's saying there's only two games. I don't remember precisely. He's really talking about wealth as opposed to status. And I think this is really important, right? Right. This that he says right here, right, I think is a critical aspect of, like, status is inherently. So what he's saying is wealth creation is a positive sum game. What does that mean? He's saying that everybody can get wealthy. And there's no reason, when you're thinking of his definition of wealth, it's not a zero-sum game. There does not have to be losers to the game. Whereas status game is inherently in zero-sum game, the original zero-sum game. And we would sort of view this as, classic terminology that I have heard frequently in the Jewish context, is that you can talk about things in sort of two separate modes, right? Talk about things in this hierarchical mode, and you talk about things in this hierarchical mode. And this is fundamentally what he's saying by status is a zero-sum game, right? He is saying that inherently in this is the idea that there can only be one, right? Like, that's a really important concept here. That status is something that is essentially saying, I'm on top, right? This is me. What just happened? Right? And then obviously it's status vis-a-vis the people lower to you. So this is a classic hierarchical game, right? So this person has more status than the next person down, right? And different societies will judge this in different ways. Obviously, we, in our society, modern society, we judge this quite significantly through wealth, through this, right? And so status is something that what he's suggesting is the game of status is vastly different than the game of wealth. Because the game of status is inherently this, somebody has to arrive on top, right? There's always somebody cooler than you, right? Have you ever heard that phrase? It's a very interesting phrase, right? When you think about it. There's always someone better than you, right? Think about what that is saying for a second. And that is saying, it's a very interesting concept. It's vastly different than, I would say, this other view of things, which is what he's suggesting. And I'm going to put it over here because I think this much more aligns with what Ash is suggesting. And that is what I will call a horizontal view of things, right? Where it's an equal playing field. And essentially what he is saying is that with wealth, right, it's a positive sum game. So meaning that it's like isolated things, right? This guy, this person over here, right, their level of wealth goes up and it has no impact on, or it may have a positive impact. That's actually what he's saying, right? Like maybe this person's wealth goes up because they contributed something to society, because they built something that society did not know how to get at scale. That's another key phrase from Naval, right? Meaning this guy, what do we picture this as? This guy built, great example. I was just mentioning language learning, right? Or you know what? Let's actually go to this, right? The car built here, the shoes he's wearing, right? Are there elements of these things that are status? 100%. They're selling into status. But somebody actually built this car. And there are countless different iterations on these types, on various cars and cool things with cars and how they've improved with time. And there's so many there has been so much. And so, let's see if there's a cool graphic. So let's say this person here, right, owns a car company, right? This person creates amazing cars, right? So this may be challenging for some people because it does not necessarily align with what they would like to believe, but it's still reality. This person creates cars, created a company, right? And that company, right? And then let's say in the process, because let's say this person 100x'd their wealth, right? They 100x'd their wealth through building amazing cars. And, right? And so the baseline was that everyone was here, right? And so if you're just viewing this, essentially what Naval is saying by this comment, posted here, just to put it nice prominently again, is he's saying that wealth creation is a positive sum game. Which, what does that mean? That fundamentally means that when this person creates cars and increases their wealth 100x, they actually also increase the wealth of these other people. But let's say, I don't know the amount, right? I'm just going to like arbitrarily say some amount, right? But it's like these people have still experienced some like 2x of their wealth, right? Again, this is not supposed to be mathematically rigorous or anything by the stretch of the imagination, right? Meaning, just the simple fact of the matter was their wealth, I don't need that line, is that their wealth was down here at the baseline before this person came along and created amazing cars. But now this person created amazing cars that other people can benefit from. And the only way that they can create these cars is if they can create a car that the other people can actually afford, right? And so there was some transfer of wealth over to this other person because this person was able to solve at scale all of these other people's problem. The problem of transportation. How do I get around, right? And so this is a really powerful concept because in the process of this person creating wealth, and yes, there was a value transfer associated with that, all these other people's lives improve. Now the challenge becomes is when you start working on the status game in this world, right? Where this person says, well, hang on a second. I don't want to be equal with this other person. I want to be better than them. I want to play a status game. And it's not good enough if everybody's standard of living improves because I want to be on top. I want to win the status game. Okay, then you have challenge. And so the challenge with a lot of wealth creation is that those two get intermixed. That's just in our culture, right? It's not to suggest every single culture is that way, right? Every single culture is not that way. In the predominant culture nowadays, it is that way. And so people confuse these things very often, and they confuse status and wealth. And many people who are wealthy use that to get them status, right? I'm not suggesting that wealthy people for somehow are these saints by any stretch of the imagination. I think, unfortunately, because we have a culture that so values status and that we use money to signal status, but again, not always, right? Then you end up with this just a toxic mix that you find with many people. And so wealthy people now can use their wealth to indicate status. But we also have these people that are like fraudsters, right? They run around and they pretend that their wealth is X, Y, and Z. How do they do that? They do that by signaling, right? They appear to be very, very wealthy. If I take this photo, again, I don't know who these people are. And so I'm just talking about the idea, not these individuals. Let's say this is a rented car, right? Let's say actually this is on a public beach and the guy just walked up to somebody else's car, thought it was cool, and had his friend take a picture of it. Now he's posting his picture, and that's what he does. So he is signaling status, right? Without actually meaning He doesn't even have the wealth to signal the status. He's just co-opting somebody else's wealth in order to signal status because he's playing the status game. Again, I'm not suggesting that this person is. I don't know who this person is. I'm just saying, hypothetically, a person could be playing that game, right? The challenge for first-time founders is the status game is so appealing. And so we get sucked into the status game. And what Ash Maurya is saying, though, is like, that's not the game. The real game is the wealth creation game, right? That's what you need to be focused on. And in the real wealth creation game, it's like the external, the branding, the status, all this other stuff is far less important. And that's what he's calling that scaling risk, right? Why? Because those elements are really about scaling out. They're the vessel that helps bring a particular set of value propositions, a particular set of elements that help people make progress in what they're trying to do, right? The branding is a vessel that just helps. It's a vehicle that helps move it towards people, right? And that is where product name, domain name, logo, these things do become important. I'm not suggesting, and I don't think Ash is suggesting for a second, that these things are not important. But they're just scaling risks, right? Having a good brand, having, good messaging, having all that, like, that's a scaling risk. But really, that's not where the challenge lies with new ventures. The challenge lies in the contents inside here, right? It lies with actual wealth creation, right? It lies with the amazing car. How do you create an amazing car? There's plenty of cars out there, but how do you create at scale an amazing car? And that is a very different question. And so if you go in and you set up a car company with a landing page and you obsess about the logo and you obsess about, then what you end up doing is you're focused entirely on the vessel, entirely on like the branding and all this other stuff, but there's no actual contents to communicate. So in other words, the challenge is then you're playing purely a status game. And in the status game, when you're playing the status game, it's just not going to, it's going to fall down sooner or later. Like, this is one of the things that I actually also think is like toxic. Fake it until you make it, right? We would call that fraud, right? Like, if you think about it, what is fake it until you make it, right? Fake it until you make it is Elizabeth Holmes, right? Look at that. Like, right? This is fake it until you make it. Like literally, this is fake it until you can actually make it. Like, it's, insanity, right? In other words, like, we call them frauds. Where are the other ones? Is fake billionaires, like fake socialite. Socialite. Let's see if there's. Okay, I'm not quite sure who this is, but here you go, right? So like, what is the right? Like, this is what we mean. Right? This is all the same thing, right? Without meaning to imply that somehow it's just women that do this. That is 100% not the case, right? Obviously, that is not the case. Like this, right? So this is fraud. And that's the other side of this idea of like, fake it until you make it, right? The trouble is, again, is like, because people are saying, right, because we value so much the status game, it means, right, because we value the status game, and because we have a culture that exists in this very hierarchical fashion, right, or how the status game plays out in this hierarchical fashion, there's this heavy incentive as a first-time founder to view this and be like, oh, I want the status. And And the status means, well, I need to fake it until I make it so people feel as though I have the status, so that I rise up in this status game. And then as I get to the top, people will come to me. Sadly, unfortunately, that is the way it happens, right? Like, that is precisely the way these things happen. But it is playing a very corrupt game. It's the focusing, and obviously I'm not suggesting that every first-time founder, I was definitely not trying to fraud people. That was not my intention. But what that is to say is that there's a gap, right? Anytime you're addressing something new in the market, there's a gap. And one of the ways you can handle that gap is by playing the status game. And many of us naturally gravitate to that, right? I'm just talking about one extreme, other extreme of that. And that is too much focus on this presentation, on the branding, on the external, without focusing on like the inner, right? The actual content, the actual wealth creation that is happening. And that is really, I think, the tragic. Let's shift this around to present more clearly, which is an interesting example, exactly what I'm talking about, right? Shifting this around can present more clearly, the presentation can be very valuable, right? I'm doing a presentation right here. It can play an incredibly important part. But it's only one facet of, you want the presentation to actually communicate content and to actually provide value to people. But if everything becomes on the presentation, how do I just give the impression? How do I put up a facade that the content is X, Y, and Z, right? How do I do that? That is one thing that a lot of first-time founders feel real pressure around. And the challenge there is that when they're first starting out, if I'm just being honest for myself, I didn't know how to create an amazing car. And there's so many things to learn that it was, it's not the sort of thing where you could just personally, like I've got this book, again, I mentioned before, Product Roadmaps, relaunched, that I really like. There is so much in this book. One of the reasons I like it is because I just feel like it's a really good overview of so many of the key opportunities, thoughts, frameworks that people have been using, opportunity solution tree, user stories, way to think about organization of product and engineering teams, business objectives. Like, there's so much stuff in here. And all of that has been learned over time. But it has taken me years to learn all that. And the challenge is, that's what you don't have. That's what it takes to create an amazing car, right? That's the hard part, right? Creating this amazing car at scale. And that's in a really well-defined market. So it's even harder. Right? It's different. There's challenges all over the place. It's different. So it's different when you're creating a new category. You're venturing into a blue ocean, as opposed to, maybe you're just trying to build a better car, amazing car, right? But that is really like the focus. And I think this is also one of the things why people say, and I think it tends to be really good advice, right? Like, go work for somebody that is building amazing cars, which is to say what? Like, go find somebody that is already playing the wealth creation game. I'm not saying necessarily a person, right? It can be an organization. Go work first in an organization that is going through this, and so that you can get exposure to this process of what it looks like to build an amazing car. Ideally, so that you can understand better the starting risks. And then once you really get that, you are in a far better place to understand how you use presentation, the brand, the external, the vessel, how you use that in order to help connect people to the value that you're creating, right? And hopping onto somebody else's fast-moving ship is significantly better than faking it until you make it. Okay, so we're back at it. Just got off a sales call that went well. And I think another gentleman doing great work that we're going to be able to help, which is going to be great. One thing that hit me though in it is an important lesson that I don't think an important lesson that has been a new experience for me. So I am not classically trained as a salesperson. And what do I mean by that? I'm not, it's always interesting, right? Because I've always told people when I was starting to dive into sales more, I was telling people, I've never done sales. I'm not a sales guy. My father is very much a salesman, classic sales guy. And I was telling people that, I'm having to learn this thing. And nearly universally, from experienced people, a lot of people that aren't so familiar with business in general, and so they may not be totally aware, but or they wouldn't make comments, but there was a lot of people that I would hear a very similar idea. And they basically said, well, yeah, okay, you've never been a sales guy, but surely you had to do a lot of selling in order to lead teams, like large teams of people, and to do integrations with enterprise clients. And that's true. That's totally true. I think there are certainly core elements there, right? Well, at the same time, I think it is a little bit like saying, well, to a cricket athlete, saying, well, yeah, but I mean, surely you could play basketball at a professional level because you've used your feet and you've run and you know how to move your arms, and you can throw this tiny ball, hit this tiny ball, a very long distance. Throwing a basketball in a hoop that's no different. And yeah, I don't know, maybe all cricket athletes are able to do that. I still feel as though there's a lot of difference between going into a situation where, say, you've got an enterprise client that you're doing an integration, a data integration work with, or you're trying to integrate a piece of your software, right? At Unite Us, that's what we had a whole bunch of very large integrations with very large healthcare systems, and I was very intimately involved in those integration processes, more on the leadership and management side than anything. And of course, it took a fair amount of selling, quote unquote selling, right? Meaning putting something out there and saying, here's what I think we should do, and getting everybody oriented around that. Of course, that's bread and butter. I mean, that's pretty easy to me. And a lot of people would sort of position with me and said, oh, that's sales. I mean, maybe, but I would say rather it's like there's techniques there, that there's probably overlap. There's things that you're going to learn in that process that are going to help in a classic sales model context. There's a lot that isn't overlap. So, I think it's a little bit more challenging than people might imagine. And so, yes, I can speak. I can, without any problem, I can get in front of a crowd of people and start talking and walk them through a project. I mean, basically with no preparation, there's a downside to that sometimes too, right? Like, I'm pretty good in front of speaking to large groups of people, but, and winging it. But sometimes when they want really precise questions, and precise details, you need a little bit more data, a little bit more preparedness. But that is a little bit of a tangent. One thing I wanted to say is I realized in this call that we just got off of that, one of the interesting things is how much I feel as though I have actually developed on the sales front, and being comfortable and fluent in asking certain questions or in pushing the conversation in a particular way. But that was all relatively new to me. And this book, I think, is something that I really enjoyed. The Challenger Sale is the name of the book. And prior to being suggested that I read this book, I didn't really have any framework for understanding sales. It sort of felt like, based on what I saw my father doing when I was young, it sort of felt like you just push. I don't know. There's like magic words to say, and you just push, and even the terminology I'm using, right? Push. And so I would say the Challenger Sale, this book really reshaped. There's two critical books for me in this regard. This book, The Challenger Sale, and then Bob Moesta's Demand Side Sales 101. I would say Bob's book is even more pivotal for me. I would say this has been an even bigger deal for me. But what was important with the Challenger Sale is that it showed me that there was frameworks for thinking about these things. And me as a product and engineering person, a very I felt prior that it was black magic, and there was this strange art that somehow had never been taught to me. And I think, so the biggest thing that I walked away with from the Challenger Sale is the realization that it's not black magic. There are frameworks actually out there. There are ways to approach it. And there's data to back up different approaches. That was really convincing for me. But it didn't necessarily help with any anxiety of feeling this sort of still pushy sense, right? They don't really talk. They talk probably about it. Maybe if I went back through it, I would actually, I would say that differently, and I would say maybe they do really actually talk about the sort of emotional, psychological side from the seller's perspective. But the big thing then I would say that demand side sales and Bob Moesta reinforced for me, or really brought to the surface, was this concept that, I guess just what it says here on the book cover. Stop selling and help your customers make progress. Right? Ryan Serhant, how do you say his name? He has this quote, shopping with friends. Let's see whether I get a fun meme here. He has this quote that nobody likes, or everybody hates being sold to, but people love shopping with friends. And I think that's very much in the same vein as demand side sales. And that is to say that it is really about how do you help people make progress. And I think it all mixes together and makes it attainable and feels like, oh, I can actually do this. It's not scary anymore because one, I'm not really pitching myself. Now at least I don't feel that way. I think maybe I'm pitching myself, certainly in one sense of like gaining trustworthiness of that I know what I'm talking about. But like, if they say no, I'm not taking it personally. It just is a piece of information now that I take back and I think, okay, what do I learn from this? Because ultimately what I'm trying to do is help them make progress. It also helps like motivate me better, that I understand, okay, there's a Challenger Sale. There's like these frameworks for thinking through how you move somebody through the conversation. That's something I totally did not appreciate about sales prior. It's a very much the art of conversation, right? How do you walk somebody through a particular path? And so that was something I really was not visible to me before reading some of these books and then speaking with practitioners of the books. But I think that is really very important, actually. And so now I can go into conversations and feel like, my ultimate goal here is to help them make progress. And I have to understand who they are in order to help them make progress. And maybe I'm not the right person to help them make progress. Like, that's totally possible too. Just because I'm speaking to them doesn't mean I'm the right person to help them make progress. And at that point, it's better to just say, I don't think this is a good fit. Or push them to say no, right? It's totally fine. Like, just, it doesn't sound like it's a good fit right now. Okay, sounds good. And move on. That's just my take. I'm not some master salesperson. Probably plenty of salespeople that would say, no, you can't ever do that. Don't ever give up on a sale. Like, listen, for me, for building companies, I'm not interested in selling somebody that is not a good fit for, especially the early stage, right? I'm not interested in selling somebody that's not actually a good fit. I'd rather move on to somebody that is a good fit. Because then that actually helps me better develop the product. Like, if I go into the product and I'm selling a bunch of people and they're not actually a good fit for the product, not only am I going to have trouble retaining that person as a customer, because like, if I'm not actually helping them make progress on their job to be done, then like, what am I doing? What are we doing here? I'm just milking the fact that they're forgetting to cancel. Like, screw me. That sounds horrible. But I'm not learning anything. Like, if they're not actually in my customer segment, then I'm actually trying to achieve a different business model, right? And it's like, it's not going to work. I'm trying to accomplish a business model over here, and with them, because I'm trying to sell them, whereas my actual business model is over here, and they just actually don't fit in it, which should be, one of the things about a business model. Business model should actually help you say who's not a customer and be totally fine with that. But for the customers that you do have that are a fit for your model, I have benefited exceedingly from having some of these frameworks in place, being able to refer to them and getting a sense of, how does this work? How do I structure a conversation? Like, I was totally lost ahead of time. I mean, totally lost. Like, people say that, well, you inevitably sold people doing these big integrations with companies, like, like leading an engineering team, leading a product team, like, yeah, you definitely sold people on ideas. I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, but it's a totally different thing in my view of, I didn't have any framework for going into cold sales, meaning I don't know the person. There's no trust. When somebody comes onto my team and I'm leading them, I'm selling them, when there's a senior developer that I'm quote unquote selling something, right? I've hired him and he's trying, that's a very different dynamic than a customer who has a total freedom to go do something else with their life. And I have zero incentive, it's not like an employee. Like, I'm sorry, regardless of what, that employee has plenty of incentive to listen to what I'm saying, right? And to give feedback and say, oh, that's amazing. Even if it was the dumbest thing in the world. I'm sorry, I have actually seen that. I've grown teams large enough that I have said stupid things and no one called me out, right? Like, I've made bad jokes and people laugh. And it stood out to me like, that wasn't funny, right? Like, who am I joking? That was not funny. Like, why are you laughing? And it took me a little while to realize of, my own personal allergy, I guess, to some of those things, if you will. It took me a little while to realize that that's not, there's a really destructive side there. Perverse incentives. People are laughing because they feel like they have to laugh. It's vastly different, with a customer, somebody that you have very, very little relationship with. And how do you move them, right, into understanding how they can make progress without a frameworks like the Challenger sale and demand side sales 101? Like, I would not have been able to do it. I just had I didn't understand the art of moving somebody through a conversation, at all, despite leading large teams, despite being, doing all these amazing, I still, it's there's something very, very different about calling somebody that you don't know or being in a meeting with somebody that you don't know and walking them through something on how you're going to help them make progress in life. When there's zero trust built up, there's zero, right? When you have no product, you have no, like, it's a vastly different thing. And so anyway, these books, definitely dramatic impact. And now, I guess I'm saying this, right? Because it's like, now I got off this call and realistically, it went really well. And I felt, it was one of those clicking moments for the first time. I so felt like, oh, you know what? Like, I know what I should say here. Let's do this. Let's do this. I felt a taste of mastery, not mastery, but like, I'm certainly not a master of it. But what I mean is like, progression, right? Mastery in the sense of like progression towards mastery of a particular skill. And that was really nice to see.